My name is Nadia, I'm 33 years old. And I found out what my family really thought of me from a birthday slideshow. Not a fight, not a conversation, a slideshow. It was Saturday, October 14th. My mother's 60th birthday dinner at Trattoria Romana on Camelback Road in Scottsdale. Low lighting, cloth napkins, a private dining room in the back that you can reserve for events. My older sister Vivienne had organized everything. The guest list, the menu, the centerpieces she'd sourced from a wholesale florist the day before, and the slideshow she put together herself on her laptop over the course of 2 weeks. She'd mentioned it at least 3 times in the weeks leading up to the dinner. She was proud of it. About 30 people filled that room, family, some of my mother's friends from her neighborhood association, a few women from her business network. My husband Derek sat next to me. He'd worn the blue dress shirt I gave him for his birthday last spring. I remember that detail specifically because later that night, when I was lying awake trying to settle my thoughts, I kept returning to small ordinary things to keep myself from going somewhere darker. The lights dimmed. Vivienne connected her laptop to the projector on the back wall. The slideshow began. The first slides were warm, old photographs of my mother, her wedding day, the 3 kids as babies in matching Easter outfits. People made those soft sounds of recognition you get when old photos surface at family events. Then the slideshow shifted to a section dedicated to each of her 3 children. Vivienne's slide came first. A beautiful photo of her standing in front of a staged home she'd recently completed for a listing in Paradise Valley. Her name in clean white script across the bottom. A caption beneath it, "My firstborn, my light." Then Marcus, a candid shot from a family trip to San Diego 4 or 5 years ago, him grinning at the camera on a pier with the ocean behind him. His name and his caption, "My baby, my joy." And then there was me, a Christmas photo from about 10 years ago. My aunt's house in Mesa. I was near the far edge of the frame, slightly cut off at the shoulder, holding a paper plate. I wasn't even looking at the camera. No dedicated caption about what I meant to my mother. Just a label at the bottom of the image that read, "Cousin Nadia, cousin." I read it twice. I kept my face completely still. There was a half-second of silence, and then a few people in the room laughed. Not meanly, just that uncertain laugh people use when something doesn't add up, but they don't want to make it worse by pointing at it directly. Someone near the back said, "Wait, is that right?" Vivienne looked at the screen, pressed her hand to her chest, and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had so many files open, I must have grabbed the wrong photo. I'll fix it later." My mother looked at me and said, "We'll fix it, sweetheart." Her voice was light, easy, already moving on. I smiled. I said it was fine. I reached for my water glass and took a sip. The slideshow moved on. Nobody brought it up again. The rest of the dinner, I watched Vivienne work the room. That's the only honest way to describe it. She moved from table to table, refilling wine glasses, making every person feel like they were the most interesting conversation she'd had all evening. She has a real gift for that. I used to admire it. That night, I mostly just watched it and noted quietly how much energy she spent on how things looked. She gave a toast toward the end of the evening, warm, well-written, the kind of toast people remember. She talked about the kind of woman their mother was and what she'd built and how proud the family was. She mentioned Marcus by name. She did not mention me, I noticed. I put my glass down and didn't say anything. Derek and I drove home at 10:42 that night. Once we were on the freeway, he asked if I was okay. I said yes. He asked about the caption, the cousin thing, and said it had to just be a mix-up, right? I said probably. What I didn't say out loud was, Vivienne spent 2 weeks on that slideshow. She is precise about everything she does for appearance's sake. A wrong label on my photo wasn't rushed carelessness. It was the kind of error that only happens to the person you stopped really seeing a long time ago. I went to sleep telling myself I was reading too much into it. 3 days later, at 11:17 in the morning, I got a phone call that made it very difficult to believe that anymore. I was in the break room at Covenant Regional Medical Group in Tempe, where I work, waiting for the coffee machine to finish its cycle. The number was a 602 area code I didn't recognize. In my line of work, I pick up unfamiliar numbers. Providers call about billing disputes. Insurance liaisons call without warning, I answered. A woman from a collections firm called Meridian Collection Services identified herself. She was calling about a commercial loan account. She gave me an account number I'd never heard. She told me the account was in default, 61 days past due, and the outstanding balance was just over $47,000. She said the loan was in my name. I asked her to repeat the account name and number slowly. She did. She gave me the name of the lender, the origination date, April 3rd of that year, and the full outstanding balance. I wrote everything down on the back of a grocery receipt I had folded in my pocket. The coffee machine beeped behind me. I didn't move. I told her I believed there had been an error. She said I was welcome to contact the lender directly, but the account had been transferred to their office for collections, and we would need to discuss payment arrangements. I thanked her. I hung up. I stood there for about a full minute, looking at the numbers on that receipt. Then I walked back to my desk and opened a browser. If you've ever been the person in the family that everyone quietly relies on, but no one actually thinks about, drop a word in the comments. I want to know if I'm the only one. Let me back up. Let me tell you who I am and where this family comes from. Because without that foundation, nothing that comes next will land the way it should. My mother, Carol Holloway, built her staging and interior decorating business over 12 years. She started small, helping neighbors get their homes ready to sell, repositioning furniture, choosing paint colors, renting pieces to fill empty rooms, making spaces look like a photograph in a magazine. She did it out of our kitchen at first, then out of a rented storage unit, then eventually a small office on Rural Road in Tempe. By the time my father died 4 years ago, Holloway Interiors and Staging had 4 part-time employees, a decent client list in the East Valley real estate market, and a real reputation in the industry. My mother built that herself, and she should be proud of it. I've never said otherwise. My older sister Vivienne is 37. She married a contractor named Brandon Stokes 6 years ago. Brandon does commercial renovation work. Well-connected, confident, the kind of man who knows someone in every room and makes sure you know that he does. After my father passed, Vivienne stepped into the family business almost immediately. She had the right qualities for it. She could talk to clients. She could make a space feel special. She understood presentation the way my mother did. She also had Brandon's network, which opened doors quickly. Within a year, she was running the day-to-day operations. The family treated this as the correct and natural outcome. Vivienne was always going to be the one who carried on what my parents built. My brother Marcus is 26. He does a little of everything, some delivery contracting, some informal graphic design work, sometimes helping out at the staging warehouse when they need extra hands. He's not irresponsible. He's just never been pushed to be any one thing in particular, because he's the youngest, and because people in my family have always forgiven him things quickly. And then there's me. I'm the one who left the orbit. I took a front desk position at Covenant Regional right out of community college. I was 23, and I just kept building from there. Moved into medical billing, then into compliance. I handle audits, insurance disputes, documentation reviews. I spend my days in the details, paper trails, discrepancy reports, records that tell the truth about what actually happened versus what someone claims happened. I'm good at it. I find it satisfying in a way that's hard to explain to people who don't do it. My family has always called it Nadia's job, with a small, careful pause before the word that communicates something like, "This is real employment, yes, but not the kind that requires much imagination." There was a Sunday dinner about 3 years ago. My mother went around the table, asking each of us what we were proud of that week. Vivienne had just signed a staging contract with a 7-property real estate investment group. Marcus had repainted the office over a weekend. When it got to me, I said I had resolved a $14,000 billing dispute with a major insurance provider that had been sitting unresolved for almost 5 months. One of those cases that keeps getting passed around because nobody wants to sit down with the full documentation and actually work through it. My mother said, "That sounds so stressful, honey." Then she asked what everyone wanted for dessert. She wasn't being cruel. She just didn't have a framework for what I did. She'd never tried to build one. I don't think it ever occurred to her to ask. Derek and I bought our house on Mesquite Lane in Chandler 3 years ago. 1,400 square feet, a small backyard, a kitchen we've been slowly updating ourselves on weekends. Nothing impressive to anyone from the outside. But we bought it without asking a single person in either of our families for help. I don't think my family knows exactly how long that took or what it required. My mother once described Derek to a friend as very kind. Just those 2 words, the way you might describe a sturdy side table. Derek teaches chemistry at a public high school. 8 years now. He loves it. That matters to me more than most things about our life together. About 2 years before all of this happened, I offered to look at the business finances. Not to take over anything, just to look. I'd been listening at dinners long enough to notice that the expenses seemed to be growing faster than the revenue, and I said as much to Vivienne. I told her I could help them tighten their billing structure. She said, "We're good, Nadia, don't worry about it." My mother nodded and said Vivienne had a system. I didn't push. I filed that away and let it go. I should have pushed. Back to my desk on that Tuesday in October. I found Saguaro Capital Lending's website in under a minute. I called their loan services line and waited 4 minutes on hold. A woman pulled up the account. She confirmed a commercial loan in the name of Nadia Holloway, listed as co-signer for Holloway Interiors and Staging. Origination date April 3rd. Amount $47,200. My name, my social security number, my credit history. I had never spoken to anyone at Saguaro Capital Lending. I had never signed any document. I had never agreed to co-sign anything for the business, for Vivienne, for my mother, or for anyone else. I thanked the woman and asked her to note in the file that I was reviewing documentation. She said she'd update it. I hung up. I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it plainly, Holloway Loan, October. I started typing notes in a clean document: lender name, origination date, account number, balance, the name of the collections representative, the time of the call, everything I could remember. I did not call Vivienne. I did not call my mother. I did not call anyone. In compliance work, the first rule is this: you don't pick up the phone before you know what you're looking at. You gather everything first. You ask your questions only after you have something to show. I didn't know yet how deep this went. I didn't know how many people in that family had known about it and said nothing to me. But I was going to find out. And I already knew, sitting at that desk, that the caption that said, Kazanada 3 nights earlier was not a mistake. The first evening after that call, I didn't do much. I organized what I had, made dinner, and waited for Derek to get home. He arrived at 4:30, found me at the stove, and could tell just from the way I was standing that something was off. I gave him a short version, collections call. A loan in my name. I didn't know anything about it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if I wanted him to come with me to the lender. That's Derek. He doesn't perform concern. He just locates the practical next step and offers to be part of it. I told him not yet. I needed documentation first. He nodded and got plates out of the cabinet. The next morning, I submitted a formal written request through Saguaro Capital Lending's secure portal, all documentation associated with the account, the original loan application, signed agreements, any identification submitted during origination, and the full payment history. In compliance work, verbal conversations with lenders are almost meaningless without documents behind them. You don't argue from memory. You argue from paper. While I waited, I ran public business filings for Holloway Interiors and Staging. Within about 20 minutes, I had a few things worth noting. The business had taken 2 prior loans in the past 4 years. $18,000 from one lender the year after my father's death, and $23,500 from a second lender roughly 14 months after that. Both listed my mother as primary borrower. Both paid off. Businesses borrow money. That wasn't unusual on its own. What was unusual was the third filing. The $47,200 loan from Saguaro Capital Lending, originated April 3rd of this year, listed Nadia Holloway as primary cosigner and primary responsible party. Not Vivienne, not my mother, me. Primary responsible party means the first call goes to you, your credit, your name, your legal exposure. I printed what I could and added it to the folder. The loan documents arrived by email 4 business days later. A scanned packet from Saguaro's records department. I opened the PDF during my lunch break and read through it at my desk without touching my food. The application was thorough. Business name and address. Purpose of loan. Operational expenses and equipment. My social security number. My home address on Mesquite Lane. My employer listed as Covenant Regional Medical Group, billing compliance specialist. The annual income figure was close, but about $4,000 lower than my actual salary. Whoever had filled this out was working from information that was slightly out of date, or guessing from an old pay stub. Then I got to the signature page. I looked at it for a long time. It wasn't my signature, not exactly. The general shape was there, the compressed middle letters, the particular slant I give the N, but the pressure was wrong. The loop on the lowercase d was open in a way mine never is. The Y at the end didn't curve back the way I curve it. I've been signing compliance documents for 6 years. I know what my handwriting looks like under different conditions and different pens. I opened 3 of my own recently signed internal forms on my work system and placed them side by side on my screen with the scanned loan page. I spent almost 10 full minutes comparing them, making sure I wasn't looking for something that wasn't there. I wasn't imagining it. I emailed the comparison to myself with a timestamp. I printed both versions and added them to the folder. Then I called Denise. Denise Park works at Southwest Credit Union, about 4 miles from our house, in their commercial lending department. We've been friends for 5 years, since a professional development seminar that neither of us wanted to attend. One of those half-day workshops where you end up bonded with whoever you sit next to at lunch, because the alternative is making small talk with strangers about industry trends. She's calm, precise, and she doesn't dress things up. I explained what I had. She was quiet while I walked her through it. When I finished, she said, "Send me the documents." I sent them. She called back 40 minutes later. "The signature inconsistency is real," she said. First issue. Second, a commercial lender should have verified your employment directly with your employer before closing a loan of this size. Did anyone from Saguaro call you at work? No. Any written correspondence before the collections notice? No. Then they have origination questions to answer on their end. But for you, the immediate problem is, once you file a fraud complaint with the lender, it's a formal investigation. It can't be undone. Everyone on that application gets looked at. I said I understood that. "I know this is your family," she said. "But Nadia, your name is on a defaulted commercial loan. Your credit score is already reflecting it." I thanked her and hung up. I sat at my desk for a minute without moving. Here's what I want you to understand about how I arrived at that moment. This didn't come from nowhere. It had a shape I recognized. I've been the invisible, reliable one in that family for most of my adult life. Not invisible in a dramatic way. I was at the dinners, I was in the group chats, I got invited to events. But invisible in the specific way that means people notice you when they need something and stop noticing you when they don't. When my father was diagnosed 4 years ago, lung cancer February, gone by September, Vivienne was the visible one. She was at the hospital. She sat with my mother in waiting rooms. She coordinated meals when he came home for palliative care. She sent the updates in the family group chat. I don't say any of that to diminish it. She was there, and it mattered. My father knew she was there, and it comforted him. What I did was different. My father had Medicare and a union supplemental plan. When he got sick, his medical billing became a disaster within the first month. Claims denied, out-of-network charges flagged incorrectly, a $9,200 charge from a visiting specialist that was coded wrong and rejected 3 separate times. My mother didn't understand any of it. Vivienne didn't either. So I handled it. Evenings after work, on hold with insurance representatives, pulling explanation of benefits documents, filing formal appeals in the correct language with the correct supporting documentation. I caught a duplicate billing error worth $4,400. I got 3 denied claims reversed on appeal. By the time my father died in September, I had reduced my parents' out-of-pocket costs by somewhere close to $17,000. Just by knowing what to ask for and how to ask for it. My mother thanked me once, directly. She said, "I don't know what we would have done without you, Nadia." Then Vivienne walked into the room and the conversation shifted, and that moment passed the way all those moments did. At the gathering after the funeral, one of my mother's friends pulled me aside and told me she'd heard I'd been such a help during the illness. I said I tried to be. She said, "Vivienne must have really leaned on you." And I understood clearly in that moment how the family story was being written. Vivienne had held things together. I had been a useful detail in the background. That's been the pattern for as long as I can clearly remember. Vivienne is visible. I am useful. There's a meaningful difference between those two things, and I've had a long time to sit with it. What's harder to admit is that I let it go on for years without drawing a line. Not because I was weak, I don't believe that, but because drawing a line means accepting a version of reality that's uncomfortable. And it's always easier to tell yourself you're choosing grace when really you're just choosing not to have the conversation. The wound that mattered most, before all of this, happened about 18 months ago. My mother mentioned at a Sunday dinner that the business was going through a slow quarter. Client referrals had dropped. Brandon had been less available for contractor contacts because he had taken on a large commercial project of his own. I listened without reacting, and afterward I asked Vivienne privately if she'd like any help reviewing their billing and collections process. I had the professional background to be genuinely useful. I'd seen enough slow payment situations in my own work to recognize the patterns from what she described. She looked at me for a moment and then said, "I think we've got it. You don't really know our industry." Not with hostility, just simply, the way you decline something that isn't quite a real option. I said okay. I didn't raise it again. 6 months after that conversation, my name appeared on a $47,200 loan. When I think about the timing now, the logic isn't hard to follow. The business was struggling more than anyone acknowledged at those dinners. Vivienne needed a co-signer with clean credit. My mother's credit had complications I'd heard about in passing over the years. Marcus had no credit history worth using. Brandon was overextended on his own commercial projects. And I, the one no one tracked closely, the one they'd dismissed when I offered to help. the one who lived 40 minutes away and had been quietly absent from the center of everything for years. I had an 801 credit score and a stable employer with verifiable income. I was convenient. That was the word that kept returning to me. Convenient and overlooked, which to certain people are the same thing. They assumed I was far enough outside the orbit that I wouldn't catch it in time. Or maybe they assumed that even if I caught it, I'd absorb it the way I'd absorbed everything else, quietly, for the sake of keeping the peace. They didn't know what I did every single day at work. They knew my job title and never thought past it. By the end of that second week, I had the loan documents, the signature comparison on paper, the public business filings printed and tabbed, my email thread with Denise saved and dated, and 4 pages of timestamped type notes in a clearly labeled document. I had said nothing to Vivienne, nothing to my mother, nothing to anyone in the family. I had not replied to a single family group chat message in 11 days. Nobody had noticed or asked why. On a Thursday evening at 7:14, I made a decision. I was going to call Vivienne, not to accuse her, not to warn her. One direct question, asked calmly, and then I was going to listen very carefully to exactly what she said and exactly how she said it. I had a notepad beside my phone. I dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring. Vivienne answered on the second ring. There was background noise, a television, someone else's voice at a distance. "Hey," she said. "Easy. Normal." I kept my voice level. I told her I'd received a collections call. I gave her the lender name, the origination date, and the balance. I said the loan was in my name, and I had never signed anything. There was a pause. About 4 seconds. Long enough to tell me something. "Okay," she said. "Yeah, I was going to talk to you about that." I wrote down the time on my notepad. 7:16 p.m. When? I asked. When things settled down a little. The business has had a rough stretch, and we needed bridge financing. Brandon looked at the numbers, and your credit was the only one that would qualify for what we needed. I didn't say anything. You would have said no if we'd asked, she continued, the words coming a little faster now, more settled. You don't understand how the business worked, Nadia. We needed it. It was a family decision. Family decision. I wrote those 2 words down. It's my social security number, I said, and it'll be paid back. The business is picking back up. Brandon has a new contract starting next month. This isn't permanent. It's 61 days in default, I said. A brief silence. Then her voice shifted slightly. Not quite defensive, but with that particular edge I'd heard before. The same one she'd used when I'd offered to look at the finances 18 months ago. Polite and final at the same time. Are you really going to make this into something? She said. I didn't answer that. I told her I needed to understand the full details of the account. I said I'd be in touch. I hung up. I put the phone face down on the table. I sat there for a while. The television was on in the other room, Derek watching something, and I could hear it through the wall. I didn't go in. I just sat with that phrase. A family decision. Said the way you'd describe choosing a vendor or moving furniture to a different room. Said like I was a resource the family had access to, rather than a person they needed to ask. My mother called at 8:41 the same evening. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 9:04. I let that go as well. At 9:17 she left a message. I listened to it once. She said she'd spoken to Vivienne. She said she hoped I wasn't going to do something that hurt this family. She said the business had been through a hard period, and everyone was doing their best. She said, "We love you, Nadia, you know that." And then she said she hoped I would think about what really mattered before I did anything rash. I saved the voicemail. I noted the timestamp. The next morning, Marcus sent me a text. Just, "Hey, you okay?" I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure yet what Marcus actually knew versus what he'd been told. There's a difference between someone who knows everything and someone who's been handed a version of it. And with Marcus, it was hard to tell which you were dealing with until you asked him something direct. I set his message aside. I'd come back to it. What I needed first was the money trail. I called Saguaro Capital Lending and requested the disbursement records, where exactly the loan funds had been sent after origination. The representative told me she could only release that information to the named account holders. I was the named cosigner. I gave her my information. She put me on hold for 7 minutes. When she came back, she read me the disbursement summary. The $47,200 had gone out in 2 transfers after closing. First transfer, $24,100 to a business checking account ending in 7742. Second transfer, $23,100 to a business checking account ending in 3891. Both transactions on April 5th, 2 days after origination. I wrote down both account numbers. I called Denise. I read her the numbers. She was quiet for a moment. I heard typing. The 7742 I can't trace from here, she said. But the 3891, The format on that matches what we see on commercial checking accounts registered to small contractor LLCs in this state. Nadia, does Brandon have a separate business account under his contracting company? I didn't know for certain, but I'd heard the company name at enough family dinners to look it up. I opened the Arizona Corporation Commission business entity search while she was still on the line. Stokes Premier Renovation LLC, registered to Brandon Stokes, active for 6 years. I couldn't confirm the account number through public records alone, but I had the name, and I had a $23,100 transfer going to a second account 2 days after a loan meant for operational expenses of a staging business. That's not what operational expenses look like. That's money moving somewhere else. I typed everything into my notes document, time-stamped, clear, labeled. I want to be precise here about the difference between what I knew and what I didn't. What I knew, my name and social security number had been used to obtain a $47,200 loan without my knowledge or consent. The signature on the documents was not mine. The loan was in default, and my credit was the one absorbing the damage. Vivienne had confirmed she knew about the loan and called it a family decision. My mother had called within 2 hours to urge me not to do anything rash. The disbursement showed a split transfer to 2 separate accounts 2 days after closing. What I didn't know: who had physically completed the application, who had signed the forged signature, and under what circumstances. Whether that second account transfer had actually gone to Brandon's LLC, or whether I was building an inference I couldn't yet back up with documentation. That distinction mattered. In compliance work, the difference between what you can prove and what you suspect is the difference between a case and a guess. I wasn't going to act on a guess, but the pattern I had in front of me, Vivienne's calm admission, my mother's call within 2 hours, a disbursement split to 2 separate accounts, a forged signature nobody was rushing to explain, that didn't happen by accident. That was coordination. More than one person had made decisions that ended with my name on a defaulted loan. Derek came into the kitchen sometime that evening, while I was sitting at the table with my papers spread out. He looked at them, looked at me, and poured himself a glass of water. Then he sat down across from me and waited. "How bad?" he asked. I told him everything. The signature analysis, Vivienne's exact words on the call, my mother's voicemail, the disbursement numbers and what they might mean. He listened without interrupting, without making a face, without offering an opinion on anyone in my family. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What do you need from me?" he said. I told him I needed a few more days to get the full picture before I decided on next steps. He nodded. He didn't tell me to think about how this would look or to consider the family side of it. He just asked what I needed and accepted the answer. That meant more to me than I could articulate at the time. The following morning, I called Denise and asked her to walk me through the formal fraud complaint process with a commercial lender. Not to file anything yet, just to understand exactly what it triggered and what it set in motion. She went through it methodically. Filing a fraud complaint with the lender meant their internal compliance department would open a formal investigation. They would pull all origination documents, review the application for irregularities, compare the signatures on file against verified samples provided by the complainant, and contact all parties named on the account. They had a legal obligation to investigate and to report substantiated findings to the relevant credit bureaus. If the investigation confirmed forgery, it required escalation, which could include referral to law enforcement depending on the amount and the findings. "Everyone named on that application gets a call," she said. "Vivienne, your mother, whoever else had involvement. Once it's filed, that process runs on its own. You can't manage it from the outside." I said I understood that. She paused. Then she said, "Before you file anything, you should speak with a consumer protection attorney. Not for representation necessarily, just to understand your rights and your exposure before you're in the middle of it. There's a woman named Patricia Leal on Elliott Road in Tempe. I've referred clients to her before. She's straightforward and she'll tell you the truth." I wrote the name down. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. That evening, Vivienne texted me for the first time since the phone call. It came in at 6:48 p.m. "I think we should talk again. In person. There's more context that would help you understand the full situation." I read it once. I put the phone down on the counter and left it there. More context. I had heard that phrase, or something shaped exactly like it, my whole life. More context for why Lauren's achievements carried the dinner conversation. More context for why my job never quite counted as a real topic. More context for why a 60th birthday slideshow labeled me as a cousin. More context was always what got offered when the first explanation didn't fully land, and it always arrived just before someone was asked to accept something that didn't sit right. I didn't reply. I opened my notes folder instead and went through everything page by page, looking for anything I'd misstated or noted too loosely. I didn't find anything I needed to change. The documentation was organized, the timeline held together, the pattern was legible without any interpretation required. Then I made a decision quietly, sitting at my kitchen table on a Thursday night with no drama attached to it. I was going to stop responding to my mother's calls. I was going to stop responding to Vivienne's texts. Not forever, not from bitterness. But because I had been absorbing things for 11 days, while the other side organized itself, and I was finished with that arrangement. I wasn't angry in the way that makes people do things they regret. I was just done being the quiet one who absorbed things while others decided what the story was going to be. Whatever Vivienne wanted to say to me, she was going to have to say it in front of the right people. And before that happened, I was going to make sure I walked into that room knowing exactly what I was carrying. Patricia Leal's office was on the second floor of a building on Elliott Road, above a legal aid office, down the hall from a small accounting firm. The waiting room had 4 chairs and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. I sat there for 11 minutes on Tuesday morning before she opened her door. She was in her early 50s, dark hair going gray at the temples, reading glasses pushed up to her forehead. She shook my hand, showed me to a chair across from her desk, and waited while I set my folder down between us. "Walk me through it," she said. I did. Start to finish, in the same order I had the documents organized: the collections call, the loan application, the signature comparison, the disbursement split. Vivienne's exact words, a family decision, my mother's voicemail, the timeline of when each thing had happened and in what sequence. Patricia listened without interrupting. She looked at each document as I placed it in front of her. She took her reading glasses down and put them on. When I finished, she went back through the papers once more, slowly. "This is well organized," she said. Not as a compliment exactly. More as an observation that told me she could work with what I'd brought. She laid out my position plainly. From a fraud standpoint, I had 3 things working clearly in my favor. The signature discrepancy, which would be visible to any trained reviewer. Vivienne's verbal admission on the phone call that the loan had been taken out without my knowledge, and the fact that neither the lender nor anyone acting on behalf of the business had contacted me at any point before or after origination. No call, no written notification, no attempt to inform or disclose. "What they did has a name," she said. "Using someone's personal information to obtain credit without their consent is identity fraud. That's federal territory depending on how far it goes." She explained what filing a formal complaint with the lender would set in motion. Their compliance team would open an investigation. They would pull the full origination file, review the application, and have the signature independently analyzed by a certified document examiner. They would contact all parties named on the account and any individuals who appeared to have knowledge of the application. That means Vivienne. It means your mother if she was involved. The lender will be asking questions that your family won't be able to manage the way they've been managing you. She said it matter-of-factly. No performance in it. She told me I also had the right to dispute the account with all 3 major credit bureaus and request removal of the derogatory marks pending the fraud investigation. She would help me draft those letters as well if I wanted. "What do you want the outcome to be?" she asked. I had thought about that before I walked in. I told her I wanted my name removed from the loan, my credit restored, and a clear documented record of what had happened. I wasn't asking for anyone to be arrested. I wasn't looking for a public outcome. I just wanted what was mine returned to me. She nodded like that was a straightforward answer. "File the complaint," she said. "Let the lender's process do what it's designed to do. I'll draft a supporting letter for you to include with the submission." I left her office at 11:22 a.m. I filed the formal fraud complaint with Saguaro Capital Lending's compliance department that same afternoon. I submitted my supporting documentation with the filing, the signature comparison, the full timeline in writing, Patricia Leal's letter, and a clear written statement of the facts as I knew them. I included the disbursement account numbers and noted the split transfer. I noted that I had not been contacted at any point during the origination process, despite being listed as primary responsible party. I sent it by certified email and requested a confirmation receipt. It came back at 3:47 p.m. I printed it and put it in the folder. 2 days passed. Then Vivienne called not once, 4 times over the course of a Thursday evening, between 6:15 and 8:44 p.m. I didn't answer. She left 2 voicemails. The first one was controlled. She said she wanted to talk, and there was more to the situation that she needed to explain in person. The second, left at 8:44, was tighter. Her voice had a different quality to it. She said, "Nadia, I need you to call me back. This is serious. You don't understand what you've started." I saved both. I added them to the folder. My mother came to the house on Friday evening. I hadn't invited her. I heard her car in the driveway and looked out the window before I opened the door. She was dressed like she'd come from somewhere, a good blouse, earrings, which told me this visit had been planned. I let her in. She sat at my kitchen table. I sat across from her. She didn't ask about Derek. He was home. I could hear him down the hall. She started with love. She said she and my father had always done their best for all three of us. She said she understood I was upset. She said the situation with the loan had been handled badly, and she took some responsibility for that. I noticed she didn't say what her responsibility was. Then she got to the point. Vivienne and Brandon were in real trouble. The bank was already asking questions. If I withdrew the complaint, the family could work out a private arrangement. The loan would be restructured, my name removed, everything handled internally. She said, "We can fix this ourselves, Nadia. We don't need to bring strangers into our family business." I let her finish. Then I said, "My name is already on the loan. Strangers have been calling me for 2 months." She looked at me with an expression I recognized. The one that meant she'd expected me to soften by now, and that I hadn't was confusing her. "You're going to destroy Vivienne," she said. "I didn't take a loan out in Vivienne's name," I said. She left 20 minutes later without resolving anything. I watched her car reverse out of the driveway. Derek came into the kitchen and asked how it had gone. I told him. He made tea without being asked and set a cup in front of me. We sat there for a while without saying much. That was enough. The call from Saguaro Capital Lending's compliance department came the following Monday. A man named Mr. Garrett, senior fraud investigator. He introduced himself carefully and confirmed that my complaint had been received and reviewed, and that a formal investigation was underway. He told me their team had retained an independent document examiner to analyze the signatures on file. He said the preliminary findings were consistent with my claim. He asked whether I would be available for a formal conference call with all named parties later that week. He said it was standard procedure in investigations of this type. I said yes. I asked whether I could have my attorney available. He said I was welcome to have counsel on standby. I called Patricia. She made herself available for the full duration of the call. The conference call was Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Mr. Garrett opened it formally. He identified the participants, stated the purpose of the call, and noted that it was being recorded. Vivienne was on the line. My mother was on the line. I was on the line. Patricia was available on a separate line if needed. Mr. Garrett walked through the complaint methodically. He stated the findings of the independent document examiner. The signature on the loan agreement did not match the verified signature samples provided by the named cosigner, Nadia Holloway, with a confidence level of 94%. He stated that there was no record of the lender contacting the cosigner at the address or phone number on file prior to or following origination, inconsistent with their required protocol for loans of this size and structure. Then he asked Vivienne directly whether she had completed any portion of the loan application. There was a pause. Vivienne said, "There may have been some miscommunication within our family about who had agreed to what." Mr. Garrett said, "I understand. My question is specifically whether you completed any portion of the application on behalf of the cosigner." Another pause, shorter this time. She said, "I handled the paperwork for the business, yes. Nadia and I had discussed her being involved in the business's financial structure going forward." I didn't say anything. I wrote nothing down. I just listened. Mr. Garrett said, "We have no record of any contact with Ms. Holloway during origination. We also have a disbursement record showing that $20,100 of the loan proceeds were transferred to an account not associated with the business named in the application. Can you explain that transfer?" Vivienne said that was a payment to a contractor we were working with. "Do you have documentation connecting that account to a service agreement with Holloway Interiors and Staging?" Silence. My mother's voice came on the line. "I think we need to pause and speak with our own attorney before we continue this conversation." Mr. Garrett said he understood and that he was noting the request. He said the investigation would proceed regardless and that all findings would be submitted to the relevant parties in writing. He thanked everyone on the call and ended it. I sat at my kitchen table after the line disconnected. Patricia called back within 3 minutes. "You heard all of that," she said. "Yes, you did everything right," she said. "The rest of it isn't in your hands now." I thanked her and set the phone down. I sat there for a moment looking at the folder on the table, plain manila, labeled in block letters with a black marker. I'd carried it to 2 appointments and kept it beside me for every phone call for 3 weeks. 17 pages inside. A signature comparison, a certified submission receipt, a timeline, a compliance letter, 17 pages. That was all it took for the truth, to stop being something they could redirect with a kitchen table conversation or a well-timed phone call. Vivienne had described my name on that loan as a family decision. A document examiner working for the lender had described it differently. 94% confidence that the signature was not mine. That wasn't an opinion. That wasn't a feeling. That was the kind of language that doesn't negotiate. I closed the folder and left it on the counter. Then I went and found Derek in the other room and told him it was done. The investigation took 6 weeks to conclude formally. In the meantime, things moved the way things move after a fraud complaint with a commercial lender. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily and without anyone being able to stop it. Mr. Garrett's team completed their document examination. Their written findings confirmed what the preliminary assessment had stated. The signature on the loan agreement was not consistent with my verified signature samples. The conclusion was filed with the lender's compliance department and forwarded to me in writing on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the conference call. I read the letter twice. Then I added it to the folder. 2 weeks after that, Saguaro Capital Lending's legal team notified Patricia Leal that they were pursuing formal remedies. The loan would be restructured under Brandon Stokes' name as sole obligated party, pending his agreement. My name would be removed from the account entirely, and a correction submitted to all 3 major credit bureaus. The lender also notified us they had referred the matter to the relevant authorities for review, given the document examination findings and the dollar amount involved. Patricia walked me through what that referral meant in practice. Not a guarantee of criminal prosecution, more of an opening of a file. Whether it went further would depend on what investigators found and whether Vivienne and Brandon cooperated or contested. Their attorney, she said, would almost certainly advise cooperation and a negotiated civil resolution rather than let it escalate. That turned out to be correct. 6 weeks after the conference call, Vivienne and Brandon's attorney contacted Patricia with a proposed settlement. They would accept full liability for the loan. The restructuring under Brandon's name would proceed. They would pay restitution to the lender covering all default penalties and accrued fees, a number that came to just over $6,400 above the original balance. In exchange, the lender agreed not to pursue further criminal referral, provided all terms were met on schedule. My name came off the account on a Friday in December. The credit bureau corrections followed over the next 30 days. By mid-January, my credit report was clean again. I printed the confirmation letter and put it in the folder. Then I carried the folder to the spare bedroom and put it in the filing cabinet. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the drawer. Then I went and made coffee. The family fallout moved slower than the legal process, the way those things always do. Vivienne didn't call me after the settlement was finalized. Not once. I don't know if that was her attorney's advice or her own decision, and I stopped wondering about it after a while. The business, Holloway Interiors and Staging, reduced its operation significantly over the following months. I heard this from Marcus, not from my mother. 2 of the part-time employees were let go. My mother scaled back to handling only her longest-standing clients. Whether she blamed the investigation or the financial state the business was already in before the loan was ever taken out, I couldn't say with certainty. Probably both played a part. Brandon's renovation business took its own damage. Some of his connections in the East Valley real estate network heard enough of the story to become cautious about referrals. Brandon is the kind of man whose whole professional life runs on reputation and relationship. That cost him in ways that didn't require me to track. My mother called me on a Sunday morning in January. I was making breakfast. I almost didn't pick up. I did. She said she was sorry. She said it clearly and without preamble, which surprised me. She said she had made choices during those weeks that she wasn't proud of. That she had put the wrong things first in the wrong order. That she understood if I needed time. I told her I appreciated her saying that. Then I told her what I needed going forward, clearly and without making it into a speech. I said I was willing to have a relationship with her, but not the same one we'd had. I couldn't be in financial proximity to the family business in any form. Not as a favor, not as a formality, not as any kind of family arrangement. I said I needed her to understand that if something was happening that affected me, I needed to be told directly rather than managed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's fair." It wasn't everything I'd wanted her to say. But it was the most honest exchange we'd had in years, and I held on to it. We have phone calls now, every few weeks. Not every Sunday. The conversations are shorter than they used to be, and more honest for it. She doesn't ask me to come to gatherings that include Vivienne. I don't ask her to choose sides. We have something smaller now between us, but it doesn't have a false floor under it. That matters more to me than the size of it. Marcus reached out the week after the settlement was finalized. He'd known more than I'd initially realized. Not about the loan specifically, but about the business being in financial trouble. He told me he'd been asked not to mention it to me. He said that directly, without being asked, which cost him something, and I knew it. We had lunch at a place near his apartment in Mesa on a Saturday in November. He paid and insisted on it, and we talked for almost 2 hours, not mostly about the loan, about our father, about what growing up in that house had felt like for each of us, and how different the same childhood looked from 3 different seats at the same table. He said at one point, "I didn't know about all the billing work you did when Dad was sick." I said nobody did. That was sort of how it went. He was quiet for a second. Then he said I should have known. I told him it wasn't his to carry. He'd been 22 when our father was sick, still figuring out what kind of person he was going to be. Most 22-year-olds weren't tracking the insurance appeals their older sister was filing after work. He laughed a little at that, then went quiet again. We see each other once a month now, sometimes more. It's easy in a way it never was when I was being quietly measured against Vivienne by proximity. When it's just Marcus, there's no performance involved, and I hadn't fully understood how much of my energy had gone into performing until I found a relationship where I didn't have to. Denise asked me, about a month after everything was resolved, how I was doing with all of it. We were having lunch, a Thursday habit we'd kept up. I told her I was okay, that some days it still felt strange, the calm, that I kept waiting for something else to surface. The way you do when you've been in a difficult situation long enough that quiet starts to feel like a pause rather than a destination. She said that's normal. Give it time. The calm is real. You just have to let yourself believe it. I thought about that for a while afterward. I think she was right. I think it just takes longer than you expect for your body to catch up with what your mind already knows is safe. Derek and I repainted the kitchen in February. It had been on the to-do list for 2 years, and we'd kept moving it down the page. We did it over a long weekend. 2 coats of a warm white with a green undertone I'd picked out for almost a year and kept second-guessing. We ordered pizza both nights and put music on, and worked without making a project of it. There was nothing remarkable about it. That was entirely the point. I'm back at Covenant Regional. Same work, same desk, same attention to details that don't lie. Billing audits and insurance disputes, and documentation that tells the truth about what actually happened versus what someone claims happened. I'm good at it. I've always been good at it. The difference now is that I stopped treating that competence like something I needed to earn permission to be proud of from people who hadn't been paying attention anyway. My supervisor asked me in the spring if I'd considered putting my name in for the compliance manager role opening at the end of the quarter. I said I was interested. She said she'd thought so. I put my name in without apologizing for it, which sounds like a small thing but didn't entirely feel like one. There's a photo on my desk at work. Derek and me at the south rim of the Grand Canyon, taken on a trip last spring that we'd planned for a long time and almost canceled twice. We're both squinting from the wind and neither of us is posed. It's not a technically good photograph, but every time I look at it, I can feel exactly what that afternoon was like. The quiet scale of that place, how the wind came up from below, in a way that made you feel small without making you feel threatened. Just small in the way that reminds you that most of the things you've been carrying don't actually require you to carry them forever. My father used to say that paper remembers what people forget. He meant it practically. Keep your receipts, document your work, don't rely on someone's word about a conversation when you could have it in writing. He was an HVAC contractor for 31 years. He dealt with misunderstandings and unpaid invoices and handshake agreements that vanished the moment something went wrong. He knew exactly what documentation was for. I think about that a lot now. How the same instinct he built into me for ordinary working life turned out to be the exact thing that protected me when the people I should have been safest with turned out to need watching. I didn't set out to build a case. I set out to understand what had happened to me. The case built itself from facts that were already there. I just wrote them down in the right order and kept them in a folder. That folder is in the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. Drawer closed. I don't need it on the counter anymore. The kitchen is a color I chose myself. The house is mine and Derek's, on a street no one else gets to manage. The work I do is real, and I know what it's worth. That's enough. It genuinely is.